This video will be the first of our new format, trying to combine a bit of all of my passions. Instead of slideshows of AI-generated imagery, I'll show a model's journey from conception, digital kitbashing, onto the painting process, all the way to its finished version. I won't be offering comments on the painting itself. Frankly, I'm only a couple of years into the hobby, and many of you are probably better than I am. If you do have any questions about the process, please let me know in the comments. In honour of our Space Wolf brothers, I will be completing my own saga, one that is near and dear to many Space Wolf players. I'll be creating my own glow-up proxy for one of my favourite characters, Bjorn the Fell-Handed. I'll still be using AI to assist me with script polishing and lore research, and that is what we'll be listening to as I work on Bjorn. I am learning this lore as we go, so please correct anything I get wrong. We all know that abominable intelligence cannot be trusted. With all of that being said, let's get started with our sort of intro to Space Wolf saga. Many thanks to everyone for being here and listening. I hope you enjoy the lore and the finished version of Bjorn. I spent weeks trying to understand one of the most feared names in Warhammer 40k, the Space Wolves. At first glance, they look like Viking space marines, all pelts, axes and howling wolves. But the more I dig, the more it feels like that surface image hides something heavier. They're not just warriors, they're a warning. So, before we go too deep into the myths, let's start with what they actually are, or at least what the Emperor intended them to be. And just a quick note, I'm still learning. Everything here is researched using the codexes, novels like Prospero Burns and the community wikis. But if you're a veteran of the lore, please correct anything I get wrong in the comments. That's part of the fun. We learn this together. When the Emperor began his Great Crusade, he made 20 legions of Space Marines, each designed with a different temperament. Some were diplomats, others siege masters, others visionaries. But one was built with a much darker purpose, the 6th Legion. Their record in the early Crusade is shorter, stranger, and more violent than almost any other. While other legions were conquering systems and swearing compliance oaths, the 6th was being deployed against Imperial forces that had gone wrong. Commanders who resisted orders, governors who refused reintegration, even other Astartes. They were the execution clause in the Emperor's dream. In one archived campaign, the Alaxis Nebula, the 6th was unleashed to restore order after another legion's failure. They did. Completely. The population, the rebels, even most of the infrastructure were wiped away. The compliance report was one line long. Order restored. That set the tone. The 6th Legion was obedience with teeth, and it terrified everyone who saw them work. To understand why, you have to look at where they came from. Their gene father, their Primarch, was found on a planet that by all rights should have been uninhabitable, Fenris. Fenris orbits a volatile star. Its seasons last decades. The oceans freeze solid, then thaw into storms that can split mountains. Imagine a world that alternates between eternal winter and volcanic summer, and somehow human tribes still manage to survive. They build their homes on rafts of rock that float on seas of ice, hunting monsters that could eat tanks. They tell sagas around bonfires that burn blue because the wood itself is frozen through with chemicals. It's not a planet that teaches mercy. So when the infant Primarch Russ landed there, he didn't grow up a prince or scholar like some of his brothers. He was raised by wolves, literally, until a tribal king found him and adopted him. From there, he became the ultimate apex predator on a world made entirely of predators. He learned loyalty, pack bond, and the brutality of survival. When the Emperor finally found Russ, their meeting was almost like a myth, a god meeting a godchild. The Emperor saw exactly what he needed, a creature of instinct, charisma, and total devotion once loyalty was earned. The 6th Legion was reforged in their father's image and given their name, the Space Wolves. At first glance, the name feels strange. The other legions had noble titles, the Blood Angels, Ultramarines, Iron Hands. But wolves? Even within the Imperium, wolves were symbols of savagery and uncontrol. And that's exactly why Russ embraced it. He didn't want his sons to be mistaken for angels. He wanted them to be feared. Their packs became known for attacking with terrifying ferocity. They didn't march like armies. They hunted like predators. Every great company operated as its own pack under a wolf lord, following scent, intuition, and instinct more than formal strategy. And yet their efficiency was unmatched. When the wolves were unleashed, compliance was almost always achieved, even if there was nothing left standing afterward. It's this contradiction that defines them. Savage yet loyal, brutal yet honourable, feral yet utterly devoted to their emperor. That tension, that inner war between the man and the beast, runs through everything about them. In Imperial records, the 6th Legion carried many unofficial titles. The Root, the Emperor's Executioners, his final sanction. They were used sparingly because their presence was a message. If the Space Wolves were coming, it meant someone had already failed. They didn't conquer, they corrected. Some sources say the other Primarchs feared Russ, not because he was the strongest, but because of what his arrival implied. It meant that the Emperor had lost patience, that the wolves were being sent to restore faith, even if it required blood. And Russ accepted that. He believed loyalty meant doing the dirty work no one else would touch. The wolves didn't see themselves as monsters. They saw themselves as the Emperor's necessary sin. Unlike many legions, the Space Wolves kept much of their homeworld's culture. They spoke in sagas, carved runes into their armour, and named their weapons as if they were living creatures. A chainblade might bear the name of an ancestor. A suit of armour could hold the skull of the warrior who wore it before. Their faith also diverged. Where most of the Imperium worshipped the Emperor as a god, the wolves saw him more as the All-Father, a mythic patriarch rather than a deity. That distinction still gets them into trouble 10,000 years later. To outsiders, it looks like pagan superstition, but to them, it's not worship, it's gratitude. They don't pray for deliverance, they pray to be worthy of the hunt. Daily life in the Legion wasn't the rigid discipline you see in Ultramarines or Imperial Fists. It was far more tribal. Feasts, duels, drinking halls, and endless storytelling built their hierarchy. A Wolf Lord wasn't obeyed because of his title. He was obeyed because his deeds filled the sagas. The highest honour wasn't medals. It was to have your story remembered and retold. Their sagas functioned like oral history, battle report, and obituary all at once. Every Space Wolf knew the sagas of his company by heart. They even had a saying: paper burns, stone erodes, but the saga endures. That culture of memory is what gives them humanity, even while the rest of the Imperium slides toward mechanized faith and cold bureaucracy. They drink, they laugh, they argue. They remember who they fight for. The tragedy of the Space Wolves begins with their loyalty. They obey without hesitation, but obedience is what damns them. Being the Emperor's executioners meant standing apart from everyone else. Other legions could celebrate victory. The wolves got only silence. No songs, no monuments, no thanks. When a world had to be erased, they did it, and then vanished back into the void like ghosts. That isolation hardened them. They became skeptical of imperial dogma, suspicious of bureaucrats, and openly defiant of hypocrisy. They served the Emperor, but never the High Lords. That attitude has kept them half outsider for 10,000 years. By the time the heresy ignites, everything that defines the Space Wolves is already carved into their bones. Their devotion, their savagery, their curse, and their willingness to carry out the kind of judgment no one else dares. That obedience will soon be tested, brutally, on a world unlike any they've ever faced. A world of scholars and psychers. A brotherhood that believes knowledge itself is salvation. Prospero. It begins with whispers, with a warning ignored, and with a Primarch who cannot stop reaching into the warp to save what he loves. The Emperor will send his wolves to bring that brother home. But before the mission ends, they'll learn what it means when loyalty becomes a weapon, and faith turns brotherhood into blood. Prospero. Even the name sounds fragile, too perfect for the galaxy it lived in. A world of light, glass, and psychic fire. A jewel of the Great Crusade, where the mind was worshipped as much as the machine. And in the middle of that brilliance stood Magnus the Red, one of the Emperor's sons, a Primarch born from the same genetic forge as Russ, his brother, though they could not have been more different. Magnus was the scholar, Russ was the hunter. One sought truth in thought, the other found it in action. And somewhere between them, the Imperium decided which version of loyalty would survive. Magnus built Prospero into a paradise of knowledge. Its capital, Tizca, shimmered like liquid glass, layered in towers of psychic crystal. The people were cultured, peaceful, and proud of it. Every citizen could read, every home had books. It was one of the few worlds in the Imperium that felt civilized. And yet, in the eyes of Terra, it was becoming dangerous, because Magnus and his sons, the Thousand Sons Legion, were born with a flaw. The same psychic potential that made them brilliant also cursed them. Their mutation, called the Flesh Change, warped their bodies into monstrosities. Magnus halted it through sorcery, an act that saved his legion, but defied the Emperor's command. That command was simple: no witchcraft, no unrestrained use of the warp. Magnus disobeyed, and the Emperor never forgot it. The story of Prospero isn't just about two brothers. It's about what happens when truth and obedience collide. When the dream of enlightenment meets the paranoia of control. The Council of Nicaea was the spark, a great convocation called by the Emperor to decide the fate of psychic use across the Imperium. Every Primarch was there, warriors, thinkers, zealots, all gathered in judgment. Magnus stood accused of witchcraft. Russ stood as his opposite, the voice of instinct and discipline. When the decree came down, it was final. No more sorcery, no more psychic rituals, no more reaching into the warp. Magnus, of course, ignored it. Not out of pride, but out of desperation. He believed knowledge could prevent the very disasters the Emperor feared. But in trying to save humanity from ignorance, he gave chaos its invitation. Then came the mistake. When Horus fell to chaos, Magnus tried to warn the Emperor. He used sorcery, immense forbidden sorcery, to break through the psychic wards of terror. He succeeded, but in doing so, he shattered the Emperor's great project, the Webway Gate, a secret path to connect the Imperium without using the warp. Magnus didn't just send a message, he broke the walls that protected mankind. And that's when the order was given. The Emperor summoned Russ. He told him to bring Magnus to Terra, to arrest him and end his disobedience. But Horus, already corrupted, twisted that message. By the time Russ received it, the words were changed. Bring him to Terra became burn Prospero, and the wolves obeyed. The fleet fell upon Prospero like a thunderstorm. Fire and ice, fang and flame. Drop pods screamed through the clouds, turning the violet skies black with smoke. What followed wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. The Thousand Sons fought with the desperation of doomed philosophers. They summoned psychic constructs, golems of living glass, storms of spectral fire, but the wolves tore through them with chain blades and bolters. The air itself turned against them. Lightning and ash mixed with the smell of ozone and blood. Russ led from the front as always. No command posts, no strategy but destruction. He was a blur of iron and fur, his frost axe Mjolnir cleaving through automata and sorcerers alike. Magnus met him at the gates of the Pyramid of Photep. Two demigods, two philosophies, two kinds of love twisted into violence. No one knows exactly what words were spoken between them, only that the psychic shock of their duel cracked continents. When it ended, Magnus was broken, his body shattered, his spirit cast into the warp. Prospero burned, and the wolves became executioners once again. From that day forward, their reputation was sealed. Even other legions looked at them differently. Where once they were the Allfather's chosen hunters, now they were pariahs. Every victory they earned carried the stench of what they had done to their brother. Russ never spoke of Prospero again, but his sons remembered. The sagas changed. The laughter grew quieter, the feasts shorter. The wolves learned that justice and tragedy often wear the same armour. There's an interesting theory among imperial historians, one that AI pointed me to while I was cross-referencing codex entries. It suggests that the Emperor didn't just allow the destruction of Prospero, he needed it. That the psychic backlash from Magnus's fall would have torn open the Imperium's defences unless something equally violent counterbalanced it. In other words, Russ and his wolves weren't just tools of vengeance. They were the counterweight in a cosmic equation, the necessary reaction. I don't know if that's true, but it fits the pattern that keeps repeating in their story. When something sacred breaks, the wolves are called to fix it, by breaking something else. In the ashes of Prospero, the wolves found no triumph. The planet was glass, the books turned to smoke, and the cries of dying scholars echoed for years in the warp storms that followed. But one thing changed forever: the wolves' relationship with the Imperium. They began to distrust its leaders, not the Emperor himself, but the bureaucracy that followed. They had seen how truth can be twisted by a single lie, how an order of bring him home can become burn it all. That lesson would define them for the next 10,000 years. There's a line from Prospero Burns, one of the most haunting novels in the series. It says, "We are the wolves. We do not choose our prey. We are sent." That might be the most honest description of the Space Wolves ever written. They don't fight for glory. They fight because someone has to carry the burden of obedience, even when obedience feels like betrayal. After Prospero, Leman Russ and his sons were never the same. They returned to Fenris with victory in their record, but doubt in their souls. Russ secluded himself in the Fang, the great fortress that watches over the world's icebound seas. He drank with his warriors, told sagas late into the night, and waited for another summons that never came. When it finally did, the Horus heresy itself, the wolves were already a wounded pack, and that wound would bleed across the stars. The irony is that the Wolves and the Thousand Sons, for all their differences, are mirror images. Both are cursed by their gifts. Both crave their father's approval. Both end up broken by the same thing: love twisted by duty. Magnus sought knowledge to protect his legion. Russ sought obedience to honour his emperor. Both were punished. Both were exiled. One to the warp, one to guilt. And maybe that's what makes the story of Prospero so tragic. It's not the death of a world, it's the death of understanding. After Prospero burns, the galaxy doesn't pause. The heresy ignites like dry grass. The wolves return to war, called again and again to act as the Emperor's final sanction. But from this point forward, they fight with ghosts at their side. Every battle is haunted by the sound of falling glass. In the next chapter, the heresy itself comes for them. We'll follow the wolves through ambushes, retreats, and the breaking of the legions. We'll see how Leman Russ, the Wolf King, goes from executioner to exile, and how the Space Wolves, stripped of faith and father both, learn to survive in a galaxy built on betrayal. The galaxy burns. The Horus heresy has begun. Brother turns on brother. Faith turns to fire. And the Space Wolves, still reeling from Prospero, are thrown back into the war they were built for. The one that destroys everything. Prospero didn't just scar them, it defined them. When the wolves returned to Fenris, they came home bloodied, hollow, and mistrusted. Other legions whispered that they had gone too far, that they were monsters in service of a tyrant. But when the heresy began, all those whispers vanished. Because now, the Imperium needed its monsters. When Horus declared rebellion, half the galaxy fell into madness. Worlds that had worshipped the Emperor turned overnight into fortresses of treachery. Russ's wolves were ordered to purge those systems nearest to their route home. They fought traitor Imperial army regiments, rogue Mechanicum warbands, and even corrupted Astartes detachments that had once been their allies. In those early months, the wolves were everywhere, reclaiming outposts, saving civilians, holding the line while the wider Imperium fractured. They earned a grim reputation as the only force that never hesitated to pull the trigger. If the Emperor's edict was unclear, the wolves made it clear with bolter fire. To them, loyalty wasn't theory. It was blood and obedience. But their numbers were dwindling. The burning of Prospero had cost them tens of thousands of warriors, and reinforcements from Terra were slow, often sabotaged by Horus's agents. The wolves began to fight like cornered predators, vicious, efficient, desperate. One of the darkest moments came at Alax's Reach, a world caught between loyalist and traitor forces. The wolves were sent to destroy a traitor garrison, but orbital bombardment data was falsified. When the drop pods landed, they came down in the middle of a loyalist camp. By the time the mistake was realised, it was too late. The wolves have killed their own. When the truth reached Russ, he didn't issue punishment. He simply said, "The Allfather counts every soul. We count the cost in silence." That silence would follow them everywhere. Months later, as the heresy expanded, the wolves received a message from Terra, or so they thought. It ordered them to rendezvous with a loyalist task force at the Trisolian system. But the message was another deception. Instead of allies, they found the Alpha Legion waiting. It was an ambush designed to erase the 6th Legion entirely. Thousands of ships hidden behind Trisolian's moons. Saboteurs planted in the wolves' own fleet. The opening volleys annihilated their escorts before they even knew who they were fighting. Russ led the counterattack himself, boarding an Alpha Legion cruiser with only his wolf guard beside him. The fighting inside those corridors was feral. Close quarters, axes and fangs against Hydra-marked blades. Russ was wounded. The wolves barely escaped, dragging what was left of their fleet back to the safety of the Segmentum Solar. That retreat marked the beginning of the end for the Legion as it had been. They were now a hunted pack, cut off, outnumbered, surviving only by instinct. When the call finally came to defend the throne world, the wolves answered, but they were far from whole. Barely 2/3 of a legion remained. They limped toward Terra through warp storms and ambushes, arriving only after the first walls had already fallen. By every account, they fought like demons when they finally made planetfall. Russ personally led assaults along the palace's outer battlements, his frost axe tearing through the sons of Horus like lightning through steel. The rout held choke points that even the Imperial fists couldn't reinforce. They fought knee-deep in rubble, outnumbered 5-1, and never broke formation. One report from the siege record simply says, "Where the walls failed, the wolves stood." But for all their valour, the siege was already lost in spirit. When Horus was slain by the Emperor and the War Master's fleet scattered, the wolves were among the first to cease fire. Russ walked the ruined corridors of the palace, his armour blackened and his voice quiet. No victory songs, no feasts, just silence. After the Emperor was entombed on the Golden Throne, the legions were broken up. The Imperium would never again allow such armies to exist under a single banner. Guilliman's Codex Astartes demanded it. Russ refused. The wolves were not soldiers, they were kin. He told Guilliman, "You can't unmake a pack. You can only break its heart." But he agreed to scale back their numbers. Each great company would act independently, bound by oath rather than bureaucracy. 1,000 warriors per company, led by their wolf lord, sworn to the Fang on Fenris. It was a compromise that saved them and isolated them. The wolves became their own world again, distant from the Imperium's politics. While others rebuilt, they withdrew. Then, on the eve of his disappearance, Russ held one final feast. Did Russ really slay Magnus? The records don't agree. Half of them are fact, half a saga. and all of them contradict each other. Some say Magnus's body fell beneath Russ's axe. Others say Russ stayed his hand at the last moment, that Magnus broke himself rather than face his brother's blade. Maybe both are true, maybe neither. What is known is what came after. Every great company was called home to Fenris. The fires burned for 3 days and 3 nights. Feasts, songs and toasts filled the halls of the Fang. And through it all, Russ laughed. He told stories of the Great Crusade, of brothers lost and battles won, of the dream of mankind when it still felt possible. Then, sometime before dawn, he stood. He raised his drinking horn high and said, "I go where the battle is greatest. I go to seek our destiny. When the wolf time comes, look for me." And then he walked into the storm. No one ever saw him again. Some say he went into the warp itself to hunt chaos. That even now he stalks the demonic realms with his chosen companions, fighting a war that never ends. Others whisper that he followed the trail of Magnus, seeking to redeem the brother he'd been forced to destroy. The truth is unknown. But that's why it still matters, because every generation of Space Wolves still believes he'll return. When the wolf time comes, the end of all things, the howls will rise, and the sons of Russ will fight beside their father once more. The Space Wolves were the blade the Emperor trusted to strike down his own son. Prospero burned, and with it, something inside them died too. The victory was hollow, a brother's blood for the Emperor's will. When the fires faded, the wolves were left with nothing but silence and guilt. That silence became their burden and their legacy. Because after Prospero, there were no more clean hunts, only penance. What came next would be remembered as the Long Night. Without their Primarch, the wolves faced a future without purpose. The heresy was over, but peace had no place for them. They were executioners without orders, predators without prey. So they did what came naturally. They hunted. They prowled the stars of the Segmentum Obscurus, cutting down the remnants of traitor hosts and purging worlds infected by warp cults. When whispers of corruption reached outposts too remote for the Administratum to care about, the wolves came. When the Inquisition hesitated, they didn't. When planetary governors begged for permission, the wolves didn't ask. They answered distress calls no one else would touch. And when Imperial commanders complained about their methods, the civilian losses, the lack of restraint, the wolves simply ignored them. Because they weren't here to win medals. They were here to make sure humanity survived the night. Their defiance was tolerated, barely, because they got results. Even the High Lords of Terror knew that when the wolves arrived, the problem disappeared. Sometimes with the enemy, sometimes with the planet. But there was always a cost. Each generation of wolves grew a little wilder, a little harder to rein in. The Canis Helix, the genetic core of their transformation, began to twist further from its original design. The line between man and beast blurred, and the howling in their blood grew louder. For the young it started as dreams, hunting through forests under alien moons, teeth bared, heart racing. Then came the rage, the uncontrollable hunger in battle, and finally, the change. The Wulfen curse wasn't just myth anymore. It was flesh and fur and claws. A brother could wake from battle no longer a man, his mind swallowed by the predator inside him. Some were locked away, others were put down. A few banished into the wilds of Fenris, to roam the ice wastes as beasts that still howled their loyalty to Russ. The rune priests called it the will of Morkai, the twin-headed god of death, a reminder that the wolves were never meant to live tame. But the wolf priests saw it differently. To them, it was decay, the Legion's very soul unravelling. And through it all, Logan Grimnar, the old wolf himself, tried to hold the pack together. He led with the same savage honor as Russ once did, but he knew what the others would not admit. The curse wasn't fading, it was spreading. Every war, every campaign brought more howling. More brothers who could no longer tell if they were serving the Emperor or their instincts. And still, the Imperium called on them. Because in a galaxy of monsters, even a cursed pack has its uses. When chaos rose again in the Eye of Terror, the wolves were the first to answer. When demonic incursions devoured entire systems, they threw themselves into the fire. And when Guilliman returned and reshaped the Imperium in his image, the wolves snarled, but obeyed. For a time. Because deep down, they remembered what it meant to be Russ's sons. To question orders. To protect humanity, even from its own masters. To fight the battles no one else would dare. The long night never truly ended. It just became the way they lived. A slow, endless hunt through the darkness, until the day their Primarch returns, and the howl of the pack is answered once more. For 10,000 years the Space Wolves hunted in the dark. They bled for worlds that would never know their names, and though their fangs stayed sharp, their numbers dwindled. By the dawn of the 41st millennium, they were a shadow of the legion they once were. Then, without warning, the galaxy broke. The Cicatrix Maledictum, the Great Rift, tore the stars apart. Half the Imperium vanished behind a wound in reality, a screaming scar of warp light that split mankind in two. Worlds burned overnight. Communication failed. Empires died. And from that abyss came demons, legions, and nightmares without number. For the wolves, it was the end they'd always expected. They faced it the way they faced everything, with teeth bared. When the rift storms rolled over Fenris, they stood upon the ice with bolters in hand, defying the gods themselves to come and finish what Horus began. They believed they would die there, but fate had other plans. Because across the stars, something impossible happened. The Primarch Rabute Guilliman, Lord of Ultramar, dead for 10,000 years, returned. He brought with him a new crusade, a reforged Imperium, and an army the likes of which the galaxy had never seen. The Primaris Space Marines. To many chapters, their arrival was salvation. To the wolves, it felt like betrayal. When the first grey-armoured reinforcements landed on Fenris, the air turned colder than the glaciers. The wolves circled them like predators testing prey. These warriors looked like Astartes, but not quite. Their armour gleamed too cleanly. Their eyes held no memory of sagas, no hint of the fire that burned in Fenrisian blood. They spoke of standard patterns and optimized genomes. To the wolves, that sounded a lot like replacement. Logan Grimnar, the Great Wolf, stood before them, an old hero wrapped in the weight of centuries. He listened to their rehearsed greetings, their perfect salutes, their citations from Guilliman's edicts. Then he asked one question. Do you dream of the hunt? None of them answered. For a time the wolves refused them outright. The Fang itself trembled with argument. Rune priests' warning of sorcery disguised as science, Iron priests urging that the chapter could not survive without new blood. Even Bjorn the Fell-Handed was awakened from his slumber to give counsel. He spoke through the crackling vox of his sarcophagus, voice like grinding stone. They are not sons of Russ. But if they bleed for the Allfather, then they are brothers enough. That settled it. Reluctantly, the wolves accepted the Primaris, not as replacements, but as outsiders who must earn their place. The early days were chaos. Old packs refused to fight beside the newcomers. Some Primaris squads vanished into the wilderness, trying to survive the trials of Fenris alone. Many died there, devoured by the very world they hoped to call home. Those who survived returned changed, scarred, lean, with the smell of ice and blood clinging to their armour. And in the halls of the Fang, the wolf priests smiled. because those warriors had finally learned what it meant to be Fenrisian. Over decades, grudging respect became bond. The Primaris learned the sagas. They drank the fire wine. They fought shoulder to shoulder with the old guard against the endless tides spilling from the Great Rift. Slowly, the wolves began to heal, not just in number, but in spirit. But peace was never meant for them. Even as the new crusades raged, dark omens stirred across the Fang. Rune priests saw visions of crimson flame and a single baleful eye watching from the void. Magnus the Red had returned, and he hadn't forgotten. For the Wolves, Guilliman's arrival had been absolution. Magnus's return would be judgment. But before that reckoning, something even stranger occurred. From the warp storms, the Wulfen returned. At first, the Imperium believed they were demons, warp-tainted beasts wearing the armour of Astartes. Even Guilliman demanded they be contained or destroyed. But Grimnar knew better. He had seen those eyes before. Once brothers, now half lost to the curse that haunted their line. They came not to destroy Fenris, but to warn it. Their howls echoed through the Fang, shaking stone and spirit alike. The priests called it a prophecy fulfilled, the first sign of the wolf time, the age when Russ himself would return to lead the final hunt. Whether omen or curse, the Wulfen brought more than fear. They brought belief. The wolves saw in them the proof that their saga was not over, that perhaps the curse of the Camus Helix had a purpose after all. And so the packs went to war again, old, new, and damned alike, united under a single banner, ready to face the fire that was coming for them from the Eye of Terror, because Magnus was coming home. The first omen was heat. On Fenris, a world of glaciers and thunder ice, the seas began to steam. Auroras turned the colour of fresh blood. Rune priests tasted copper in the wind and said nothing, because they already knew the name behind it. Magnus. Not as a rumour in a saga, not as a ghost from Prospero, but as a living wound in reality. His sons, thousand-sun sorcerers clad in cobalt blue and gilded sigils that shimmered with sorcerous light, spilled from the warp like broken glass. Their warplate glowed as if lit from within, the gold trim shifting and whispering as if alive, their eyes burning with the cold hunger of Tzeentch. Tzeentch's demons followed, shrieking screamers, cackling flamers, and great shifting things that remembered being gods. The wolves met them at the edge of the ice. No speeches, no parley. Bolters, axes, teeth. The Fang, fortress mountain myth, lit its runes and woke its guns. Bastion macro batteries raked the sky, sacristan engines sang. Wolfguard in tarnished Terminator plate sealed the inner gates while packs of bloodclaws whooped battle prayers and begged to be first out. But sorcery makes a mockery of walls. The air bent, distances lied. One moment the enemy was a league away, next heartbeat crimson helms flashed inside the outer wards, walking through folded space like stepping across a stream. That's when the Grey Knights arrived. Silver helms, names engraved in hidden script. The Ordo Malleus came with them, carrying writs with the stink of Terra's ink still drying. "Contain the abominations," their envoy said, voice iron flat through a vox grill. He didn't mean demons, he meant the Wulfen. It should have been simple. Prime charges, clean purges, a tidy report. But nothing about the Space Wolves is tidy. Logan Grimnar read Terra's orders, closed his fist around the parchment, and let the ash drift down like snow. "We do not butcher our brothers to make your ledgers balance." The Grey Knights did not argue. They simply drew their blades. The wolves bared theirs. And for a heartbeat, the fortress of Fenris held two wars at once. The one against sorcerers in the snow, and the one in the halls between those who knew the cost of the warp, and those who thought they did. Then the mountain shook. Daemonic fire crawled down the Fang's flanks like living oil. Tzeentchian warpfire doesn't spread like flame, it chooses. It licked at warding runes until the patterns unravelled, and spat laughter when a bastion's shielding sputtered out. Sorcerers sang in languages that weren't sounds, and reality listened. The old solution woke. Bjorn the Fell-Handed came online to the sound of the Fang groaning and the smell of ozone and wolf incense. When the sarcophagus lock cycled, ancient hydraulics sighed like a beast stretching. Vents blew frost. The world sharpened into simple things, target runes, heat blooms, and the tug of memory older than most empires. Name the foe, he growled. Magnus, answered a wolf priest. Again, something like a chuckle rumbled through the vox. Good. I remember the measure of him. Bjorn strode into fire with a predator's patience. Every footfall left a print of melted snow that hissed into steam. When a screamer darted at him, he caught it in his fell hand and tore it into smoke and colour. He did not hurry. He did not rage. He hunted. On the ice shelf below, the line wavered. Rubric Marines, empty suits filled with cursed sand and will, advanced in lockstep through bolter storms that should have shredded them. Their sorcerer lords raised staves inlaid with eyes that blinked sideways and peeled squads out of time, dropping them to the flanks where no scouts had ever seen them move. The wolves countered with old truths. Close the distance, break the line, kill the one with the staff first. Stormfang gunships screamed low, autocannons coughing. Skyclaws dropped like meteors. A Longfang pack, greyer than the mountain they stood on, sighted calmly into the madness and made every shot count. Inside the Fang, the other war burned colder. The Grey Knights pressed. The wolves refused to yield the Wulfen pens. Fenrisian aides ferried wounded along tunnels, carved when the world was young. Somewhere in the shadowed galleries, a Wulfen pack hammered a rhythm on ferrocrete with their claws, answering the battle outside with a promise: let us loose. Grimnar's decision was short and very, very Space Wolf. He opened their cages. The Wulfen exploded into motion. Muscle, fur, and murder joy, sprinting on all fours, vaulting buttresses, howling the names they remembered in their bones. They hit the sorceress lines like a storm headbutting a coastline. Daemon packs broke and ran in twitching avalanches. Rubricade didn't break. They ceased, armor collapsing when the spell that held them together stuttered under raw, ugly violence. To the Grey Knights, it looked like heresy unchained. To the wolves, it looked like brothers coming home. Bjorn met the enemy champion, where the fire ran blue. Not Magnus, this time, a prince of sorcerers, wearing a body borrowed from a nightmare. The duel was workmanlike. No speeches, no ballet. Hammer, claw, counter, step. When it ended, the ice cracked open from the force of the final blow, and warp light fled down into black water. The invasion did not end with that duel. Tzeentch doesn't end. It rearranges. The enemy withdrew as if bored with the shape of this failure, promising itself a better pattern next time. They left Fenris scarred. Melt lakes where glaciers had stood for millennia. Charred sigils branded into bedrock. A mountain fortress that had held, but now groaned like an old warrior, after a dozen scars and one too many winters. The Grey Knights departed without ceremony. No apologies, no condemnations either. One of them paused long enough to incline his helm at Grimnar, as close to respect as their order ever shows. And then they were gone, silver streaks folding into the dark. The wolves buried their dead by starlight. They drank for each name. They sang until their voices went raw. Then they sang more. In the quiet that followed, the rune priests gathered and spoke softly of a thing they had not admitted to each other until now. The omens were not warnings. They were announcements. The enemy was not testing their walls. He was checking the time. Magnus had not come to win. He had come to begin. And the wolves understood. This was not the end of a saga. It was the middle. And the middle is where the hardest choices live. Magnus's departure left behind more than ruins. He left echoes, whispers in the walls of the Fang, dreams that bled through runes meant to ward them. Wolf priests began to speak in tongues they didn't know. Rune priests woke screaming, their eyes glowing with borrowed light. And deep beneath the fortress, the Fang's oldest vaults, sealed since the days of Russ, began to stir. Grimnar ordered them sealed again. But Fenris has never obeyed commands easily. The warp storms thickened. One by one, outposts went silent. Long-range augurs showed phantom fleets prowling the edges of the system. Some demonic, some imperial, some impossible to tell apart. Even the stars looked wrong. To the Imperium, Fenris was secured. To the wolves, it was haunted. And yet, in that silence, the packs rebuilt. The dead were burned. The wounded drank, swore, and returned to the hunt. The Primaris, those same grey-armoured newcomers once seen as outsiders, fought like possessed men. They had stood beside the Wulfen, seen things that defied science and sanity, and still refused to break. Now they were no longer reinforcements. They were sons of Fenris. Among them rose a warrior named Ragnar Blackmane, young, impetuous, born for the storm. He saw what Grimnar could not, that the galaxy itself was changing, and the wolves had to change with it. Ragnar led the first great counterstrike of the new age, the Fenrisian Reclamation, a series of brutal assaults across the Segmentum Obscurus to reclaim every world lost to the demonic tide. They hunted Magnus's covens through warp-scarred systems, silenced cults that spoke in his name, and burned effigies of his one-eyed visage from hive to hive. It wasn't victory, it was vengeance. But vengeance has a price. Every campaign drew them further from home. Every warp jump twisted something inside the Legion's soul. Reports came of entire packs vanishing mid-transit, ships arriving centuries too early or too late. The warp didn't just hate them, it remembered them. Then came the message that changed everything. A fleet, enormous, imperial, marked with the sigil of the Inquisition, was approaching Fenris. Not to aid, to inspect. Guilliman himself had decreed it. Fenris was to be brought into compliance with the new Imperium Sanctus, its traditions reviewed, its gene seed tested for corruption. The wolves understood what that meant. They had heard those words before. They called it what it truly was, an inquisition of blood. When the ships arrived, the skies over Fenris burned white with re-entry. 1,000 gun-cutters disgorged servitors, chirurgeons, and black-armoured inquisitors with purity seals longer than their swords. They came bearing holy writs and data scrolls, demanding access to the Fang. Grimnar met them on the ice, axe in hand. No war erupted, not openly, but every step the Inquisition took inside the Fang was shadowed by warriors who did not blink. Every sample taken was watched, and when one Magos suggested the Canis Helix might need correction, his body was found half buried in snow the next morning, claw marks frozen into his armour. The official reports listed it as an unfortunate wildlife encounter. No one believed it. The wolves cooperated just enough to avoid excommunication, but their patience was not infinite. They'd spent 10,000 years serving an Imperium that never trusted them, and this new bureaucratic age was no different. As the Inquisitorial fleet departed, one of its astropaths sent a final message back to Terra. The wolves endure, but they are not tamed. They were right, because in the following years, as the Great Rift widened and the Imperium tore itself in half, the wolves once again went where no one else dared. They hunted in the dark between realities, striking demonic hosts before they could fully manifest, cutting off cult uprisings before the ecclesiarchy even learned their names. The packs became ghosts, silent, brutal, and unpredictable. Imperial governors learned that if they prayed loud enough, the wolves might come, and if they lied about their need, the wolves might come anyway. Because that was their purpose again, to hunt the things the Imperium couldn't admit existed, to protect humanity, even when humanity feared them for it. They were the Emperor's executioners once more, but this time, they chose their own targets. And in the Fang's deepest chambers, where the rune fire never goes out, Bjorn the Fell-Handed slept and dreamed. He saw Fenris split in two, oceans boiling, skies aflame. He saw a shadow of gold standing beside a wolf made of starlight, and he heard a voice, deep, ancient and familiar, whisper only 3 words. The hunt begins. The sky tore open. No warning, no prophecy. One heartbeat there was night, the next there was madness. The Cicatrix Maledictum ripped the galaxy in half. Every world was split between light and shadow. In some the sun froze in the sky, in others it bled. For the first time since the heresy, humanity faced extinction on a scale too vast for words. And at the edge of that wound, where reality screamed loudest, was Fenris. The storms of the warp howled across the system like living beasts. Astropathic messages burned out mid-transmission. Navigators went blind. Even the stars that the rune priests had used as waypoints for millennia blinked out, one by one. Fenris stood alone, but isolation was nothing new to the wolves. They'd been alone for 10,000 years. They knew how to survive in the dark. When most chapters withdrew to fortress worlds, the wolves did the opposite. They went hunting. Strike fleets fanned out into the maelstrom, riding blind through warp rifts that could swallow entire star systems. They followed distress calls, half-heard prayers, and the smell of fear. Sometimes they found Imperial survivors. Sometimes they found demons. They killed both when they had to. In those days, the Space Wolves were less an army and more a rumour. Whole sectors whispered about spectral gunships appearing out of warp storms, killing every heretic, every demon, and vanishing again before the Vox static cleared. The Administratum dismissed the reports as superstition, but the wolves didn't care who believed. They weren't fighting for terror anymore. They were fighting for humanity itself, for the common people who had no one else coming. Each hunt took its toll. The fleets rarely came back whole, some never came back at all. The Wulfen curse spread again, quiet and slow, like a sickness they refused to name. The Canis Helix twisted under the strain of the warp. Even the Primaris reinforcements, once thought immune, began to show signs. Flickers of rage, eyes that glowed under moonlight. The rune priests gathered in secret and confessed what they feared most, that the curse wasn't a flaw anymore. It was becoming a calling. And while the galaxy burned, a new figure rose among them. Ragnar Blackmane. Now no longer the impetuous cub he once was. He'd become something sharper, a weapon honed by too many losses. When news reached Fenris that Guilliman himself had crossed the Great Rift and declared the Indomitus Crusade, Ragnar answered. He led the Space Wolves' great companies into the void to join the war for the Imperium Nihilus, the half of the galaxy that had no light, no Emperor's guidance, and no hope. There, Ragnar became legend. He struck at Chaos warlords who commanded demon hosts and traitor princes. He tore through Black Legion raiding fleets. He fought in the ruins of shrine worlds where faith itself had died. And in the end, he faced an enemy out of myth, Ghazghkull Thraka, the prophet of the Warg. Their battle would become one of the most savage duels in the Age of the Great Rift. Two forces of nature colliding, one made of flesh and iron, the other of claw and fury. When it ended, both lay broken. Fenris mourned Ragnar as dead, but fate wasn't finished with him. When Ragnar returned, reborn through Primaris transformation, stronger, faster, more feral. He was no longer the Wolf Lord of legend. He was a myth reborn. Half man, half memory of everything the wolves used to be. And he carried with him the same hunger that burned in Russ's blood. Under Ragnar's banner, the great companies united once more. Old rivalries dissolved, the packs moved as one. They no longer fought for survival, they fought for the hunt itself. The wolves became something the Imperium didn't know how to categorize anymore. Too wild for its bureaucracy, too loyal to be condemned. A weapon it needed, but couldn't control. Guilliman tolerated them, barely. In private, he called them a necessary madness. To the wolves, that was the highest praise they could ever receive. While the rest of the Imperium tried to rebuild order, the wolves hunted chaos wherever it bred. In the void, in forgotten systems, even inside Imperial ranks. There are records, redacted of course, of wolves boarding rogue Mechanicus cruisers, executing entire tech clades for trafficking in warp-tainted relics. Reports of wolf priests dismantling ecclesiarchy processions when they found demonic sigils hidden inside relic shrines. The wolves didn't care who wore the seal of the Imperium. If corruption stank of the warp, they burned it. They stopped being the Emperor's executioners. They became the galaxy's. And through it all, a single question echoed across the Fang, whispered between initiates, carved into mead hall tables, muttered in dreams. When will the Wolf King return? Every generation of wolves has asked it, but in this age, this broken, twilight age, the question no longer sounds like hope. It sounds like inevitability, because the omens are multiplying. The warp howls louder every year, the Wulfen's numbers are rising again, and Bjorn, ancient, near-silent Bjorn, no longer sleeps. He listens. The Rune Priests claim they can hear something too, not words, not prophecy, just the distant sound of footsteps. Fenris had always been a world of omens. Every storm was a warning, every aurora a message. But in the age of the Great Rift, the signs multiplied until even the blind could feel them. The moons no longer followed their orbits. Seas boiled in the dead of winter. The rune fires inside the Fang burned blue instead of gold. And the wolves that roamed the tundra began to howl toward the stars. The Rune Priests gathered in the Hall of the Hearthfire, their voices low, their faces carved by sleepless nights. They traced the changes in the constellations and found patterns older than any saga. The same alignments that had appeared during the siege of Prospero, during the Age of the Burning Sky, and once before that, during the departure of Russ. He said he would return for the final hunt, one murmured. Perhaps he never left, another replied. Even Bjorn stirred at the whispers. In his stasis dream he saw flickers, visions that felt less like memory and more like prophecy. He saw a wolf of fire running through void-black snow. He saw suns fighting suns beneath twin suns bleeding into one. And he saw a golden figure standing on the horizon of a dying world, raising his weapon not in anger, but in farewell. When Bjorn woke, the Fang trembled. He spoke through the vox that linked to every great company. His voice was slower now, the machine tone deeper, but the message was clear. The wolf time is near. Prepare the packs. Across the fortress monastery, silence answered. Then the clatter of armor, the low growl of awakening engines, the sound of 10,000 warriors readying for something they could not name. Outside, the sky cracked with auroral fire. Within, the priests read the runes. Every omen agreed. The hunt was coming. The youngest Bloodclaws gathered around the hearths to hear the tale again. The one every Fenrisian knows by heart. How Russ left the Fang after the Feast of Victory. How he vanished into the stars with words that burned brighter than flame. When the wolf time comes, when the stars bleed and the sky is torn, I shall return, leading the final hunt. For 10,000 years those words were myth. Now they sounded like a schedule. Some packs believed Russ would return in flesh. Others thought he already had, that his spirit moved through the Wulfen, through every brother who lost himself to the beast. The Iron Priests spoke of strange signals buried in the Fang's deepest data vaults. Encrypted transmissions, repeating across millennia, waiting for a key no one could identify. Guilliman's envoys dismissed it as superstition, but even they could not explain the readings. Fenris's magnetic poles were shifting, aligning with an impossible point beyond known space. a region where the warp screamed too loudly for any astropath to see. The wolves called it the Path of Morkai, the gate between life and death. They believed Russ had carved that path himself, and now it was opening. The first to feel it were the cursed. The Wulfen began to gather without summons, drawn from frozen wastes, battlefield ruins, and even the depths of the warp. They came in packs, hundreds strong, howling toward the Fang, not as beasts lost to madness, but as hunters answering a call. When they arrived, the other wolves did not raise weapons. They knelt. Rune priests claimed they could hear voices through the howling, ancient Fenrisian words braided with something older still. One translation survived in the sagas. He comes through storm and fire. The spear will burn. The pack will follow. No one knew what it meant, but they prepared anyway. The great companies reforged their fleets. Wolf priests consecrated the Fang with blood and mead. The Iron priests reawakened relics older than the Imperium, contemptors, land raiders, even a single Stormbird from the Great Crusade, its engines still stinking of ozone and history. The wolves were not praying for survival, they were sharpening their teeth. From Terra, Guilliman sent no orders. The High Lord spoke of containment, of observation, of monitoring the Fenrisian anomaly. But even the Inquisition hesitated, because something was happening on Fenris that no one wanted to interrupt. Every astropath who tried to reach the system reported the same thing: a wall of sound. Not screams, not static, just a long, drawn-out howl that filled their minds until they went blind or mad. The Ecclesiarchy declared it heresy. The wolves called it music. In the final days before the storm, Bjorn's sarcophagus went dark for 7 hours. When his systems re-engaged, his voice was different, quieter, but certain. "I saw him," he said. "He stands where ice meets fire. He waits." He would not speak further, but the rune priests understood. The sagas said Russ would not return as he left, not the Laughing King, but something older, sadder, and far more dangerous. They began to record the omens in a new saga, The Last Hunt, though none expected to survive to finish it. Fenris burned with cold light. Walk storms circled the planet like wolves around prey. Every pack stood ready, their fleets hidden beneath the aurora, engines humming like distant thunder. They didn't know what they were waiting for. They only knew who. In the final night before the storm, Logan Grimnar stood upon the Fang's highest balcony. Below him, the entire chapter howled, a single voice of defiance rising into a sky splitting with colour. The old wolf smiled. "He'll hear us," he said, "wherever he is." And somewhere beyond the edge of the Great Rift, something answered. Not in words, not even in sound, just a pulse. Ancient, rhythmic, and unmistakable. A heartbeat. The Fang's Auspex arrays detected nothing, but every wolf felt it in their bones. The Primarch's promise had never been a metaphor. It was a countdown. The night before it began, Fenris felt older than the stars. The ice sang, not from wind or shifting flows. This was deeper. A bass hum rolling through the bedrock, turning snow to powder on the Fang's balconies and shaking icicles loose like teeth. It made the mead in the cups tremble. It made even the bravest wolves listen. The rune priests called it a naming. They said the world was speaking its true word aloud, the way a hunter whispers a prayer before loosing the spear. The packs didn't sleep. They checked seals, tightened straps, fed engines and spirits alike. Wolf priests walked the lines with bowls of smoke, marking helms and brow plates in ashen oil, intoning the old Fen sayings: "Bite clean, bleed last, bring them home." In the reliquary decks, iron priests woke the ancients. Contemptors flexed, servo bundles creaking like glacier ice. A single Stormbird, older than the Imperium's bureaucracy, coughed to life after centuries and flooded the hangar with the smell of hot ozone and colder memories. Bjorn listened. His sarcophagus did not stir, but inside, the mind that remembered Prospero, the heresy, and every winter since, traced the shape of the omen like a claw around a throat. He did not ask for visions. He counted. Enemies, guns, brothers. Above the mountain, auroras braided themselves into something that looked like a spear, shaft of pale fire, blade of burning blue. It held for a breath. 2, 3, then unraveled into 1,000 scars that rained across the sky. The howling began. Not from the kennels, from the tundra, from the islands, from the black seams of ocean between them. A chorus so wide it felt like the planet itself was drawing breath through its teeth. In the hall of the Half-Fire, the youngest Bloodclaws went quiet. One set his cup down without finishing it. Another made a sign against the evil eye, then pretended he hadn't. Logan Grimnar stood. He wore no cloak now, only plate and the weight of every choice that had brought the chapter to this night. He looked at the rune priests. They nodded once. "Wake every pack," he said. "Open the outer gates. We meet whatever comes standing." The gates unsealed with the sigh of an old beast stretching. Cold rushed in. Praise went out. The first shapes on the horizon were not starships. They were wolves. Hundreds, thousands. Ghost pale on the ice, their breath steaming in banners. They ran in silence until they reached the shadow of the fang, and stopped. Eyes up, ears forward, as if waiting for a command they had known since before language. None came. Instead, the second wave arrived. Wulfen, lean as famine, powerful as avalanches, loping from every direction, vaulting scree, claws sparking against rock. They didn't snarl, they knelt. A Fenrisian thrall dropped his data slate. A grey-shield Primaris made the sign of the Aquila, and then, remembering where he was, lowered his hand and bowed his head instead. The rune priests stepped forward together, staffs grounded, voicework braided across the wind. Their chant had no words the Vox could catch, only harmonics that seemed to untangle the knots in a man's spine and make the hair lift along his arms. Something answered, not a sound, a pressure, like standing on the edge of a cliff and feeling the sea breathe against stone. The Fang's long-range auger arrays flickered, then died. Astropathic choir pits reported nothing, and yet everything. A single line burned across every mind in letters of frost. The hunt. No time, no place, only purpose. Grimnar lifted his axe in salute toward the empty sky. We've never needed orders to do what must be done. Packs moved without being told. Longfangs took the ridgeline and laid out their cases like surgeons setting tools. Bloodclaws jogged in loose columns, laughing too loudly, then catching themselves and laughing again because fear tastes better when you chase it. Intercessors checked each other's armor with the quick, competent intimacy of men who expect to die for one another. A lone wolf guard adjusted the fetishes hanging from his pauldron and whispered a name that might have been a son's or a brother's, or a promise. Bjorn's channel opened, static, then the glacier slow rumble of a voice older than some wars. "Remember Prospero," he said. "Remember why we did it." "Bite clean." A hush followed. Even the wolves below seemed to bow. From the rift's edge, the first enemy signals sparked, ragged, inconsistent, bleeding in and out of range like lanterns in a storm. Sorceress signatures fanned like peacock tails. Demon patterns curled on themselves, hungry and patient. Magnus did not show his face. The Thousand Suns did not descend in formation. Instead, the warp itself frayed along the horizon, daylight ringing like struck metal as distance bent, and the snowfield 30 leagues away became the ground underfoot. The wolves did not step back. They stepped in. Skyclaws ignited jump packs and drew lines of fire through the aurora. Stormfangs roared low enough to make armor rattle on racks. And from the open gates, the Wulfen poured like floodwater, a living spear that hit the first warp tear the instant it split, and held it, howling, with claw and hatred while the priests sewed the sky closed with spoken iron. On the inner ramparts, a grey knight stood beside a wolf priest. Neither looked at the other. Both watched the same tear try to grow teeth. The knight spoke first, voice little more than frost on steel. "Your beast should be leashed," he said. The wolf priest's reply was kind, which made it cruel. "Brother, my beasts are kneeling," he said. "Are yours?" The knight did not answer. Some truths are easier to fight than to concede. Below, a rubric cohort walked out of mirage snow, sand whispering inside sealed helms, staves raised. Bolts broke like hail over them, but the wolves had learned their alphabet. Kill the staff, kill the spell. A Longfang pack sighted, exhaled as one, and wrote 3 neat punctuation marks across the battlefield. The rubrique stopped. Their armor slumped like puppets that remembered gravity. A new light flickered, sickly, sweet, promising. Warp flame rolled toward the Wulfen, tasting, choosing, deciding what to become. It hit and became nothing at all. The beasts did not burn. They howled, and the flame forgot itself. The line held. Not clean. Never clean. But when the first hour ended, the Fang still stood, and the enemy had learned what every enemy eventually learns. The wolves do not retreat, they reload. Night thickened. The auroras went from spear blue to blood red. Thunder spoke in sentences. Every few minutes a name went up on the Vox and another cup was poured into the snow with the old promise. We bring you home. Grimnar walked the wall. He stopped beside a Primaris whose helm still gleamed like a parade. The warrior's hands were steady. His eyes were not. "First time?" the great wolf asked. "Yes, Lord," the Primaris said, and hated the tremble in his voice. Grimnar nodded toward the Wulfen below. "Good," he said. "Remember this. Fear is just the beast scenting blood. Use it. Hunt with it. Never let it hunt you." The Primaris blinked once, twice. When he looked back to the field, his breathing had slowed. Midnight, or something like it. The sky had lost the trick of telling men what hour it was. The rune priests felt the change first. Their chants faltered, not from weakness but from recognition. A pattern inside the storm turned and looked back. Across every channel, at once, without vox, without sound, a message arrived. Not words. Footsteps. 1, 2. Steady. Near. The wolves on the ice stood. The Wulfen lifted their heads together. Every wolf on the walls felt the hair rise under his armor, and did not shame himself for it. Bjorn spoke, but this time it wasn't a command. It was a witness. "He is near," he said. "I do not say he comes. I say he hunts. Feel the difference?" Logan Grimnar closed his eyes for a heartbeat and smiled a smile no enemy had ever seen. "Brothers," he said softly, and the word reached every ear. "Hold." The storm inhaled. Something moved in it, too large to be a man, too old to be a ghost, too present to be a memory. The aurora tore down the center like canvas ripped by a claw, and then nothing. Silence so complete it felt like sound had been outlawed. The Wulfen did not howl. The wolves did not breathe. The warp did not laugh. Every warrior on the wall stood very still and learned a lesson that cannot be taught, only given. Sometimes the most terrible thing in the world is not yet. The moment passed. Reality remembered its lines and resumed the play. 1,000 suns withdrew, not routed, not victorious, simply uninterested in the shape of this battle any longer. The tears in the sky stitched closed like wounds that had decided to heal later. The demons went out like bad candles. The wolves did not cheer. They counted the dead. They shouldered them. They sang. When the last name was spoken and the last cup poured, the rune priests gathered again. "Was that him?" a Bloodclaw asked a priest too old to answer consolations. The priest looked at the sky, the ice, the mountain. "He does not arrive, pup," he said. "He arrives in you." The Bloodclaw didn't understand, not then. He would, in time, in battle, at the end of all things. Bjorn closed his channel. The Fang dimmed its ward lights to embers. Grimnar went to his balcony and watched the wolves bed down on the ice, as if it were any other night. Ragnar's fleet signalled from the dark. Short, clipped, hungry, ready. Name it. Grimnar answered with 2 words he had not said in a century. Run them. The hunt, not the omen, not the promise. The hunt began. When dawn came to Fenris, it was wrong. The light had a new colour, half gold, half ash. The sea steamed, the mountains gleamed with veins of frozen lightning that would never melt. And above the Fang, where the aurora had split, the sky now bore a scar that refused to fade. The wolves didn't speak of victory. They spoke of survival, and even that with suspicion. They knew when an enemy retreats, it isn't finished. It's thinking. For 3 days, silence ruled. No warp interference, no demons, just quiet, the kind that feels borrowed. Logan Grimnar spent it walking the halls. He stopped at the training cages, the forges, the scriptoriums, the crypts. Everywhere he went, warriors turned their heads but didn't salute. They just met his eyes, and he nodded once, like an old wolf counting his pack after a storm. In the reliquary chamber, Bjorn slept again. His sarcophagus was still smoking from battle heat. Around him, the iron priests hummed repair prayers, sealing fractures with steady, reverent hands. One tech thrall noticed his vox still live. Static hissed, then a whisper, barely more than air moving through ruin. He is close. The thrall said nothing. Some things are meant to be heard only once. Outside, Ragnar's fleet held station above the planet. Reports spoke of clean space for the first time in months. No enemy signatures, no walk shadows. Only a strange low-frequency pulse that none of the instruments could locate, like the echo of a heartbeat that wasn't there anymore. The rune priests gathered again in the Hall of the Half-Fire. Their runes lay scattered on the table, glowing faintly blue. Every reading pointed to the same word, though none of them dared to speak it. Return. If it is true, one said quietly, then everything changes. If it is false, another answered, then everything changes still. They agreed on only one thing. Whatever comes next will not be guided by terror, or codex, or council. It will be decided here, on Fenris, beneath a sky that remembers every oath ever sworn. That night, the wolves feasted, not in triumph but remembrance. Every empty seat had a name, every toast carried the same refrain. May the Allfather judge us by the hunt, not the kill. Grimnar sat at the head table, staring into his cup. Ragnar stood beside him, younger, faster, already carrying the weight that comes next. Between them, the silence of generations. Then Grimnar smiled, faint and fierce. "You'll see him before I do," he said. "Tell him the pack is ready." Ragnar didn't ask who him was. He already knew. Far across the galaxy, in places no human light had reached since before the heresy, sensors began to register anomalies. A surge of psychic resonance shaped like a spearhead. A corridor through the walk that refused to close. A sound, faint but distinct, recorded by 100 different machines and translated 100 different ways. On Fenris, the translation needed no words. It was a howl, not from a throat, from the stars. The rune priests looked up, and for once none tried to explain. Explanations are for scholars. This was a story, and stories only end when someone stops telling them. But no one stopped, because somewhere out there, beyond the rift, beyond the reach of any emperor or demon or god, a hunter was moving, and every heart that still called Fenris home beat a little faster, as if answering a sound older than blood. The Imperium will call what happened on Fenris a strategic anomaly. The Inquisition will redact the data. The Mechanicus will claim it was a magnetic resonance misread, and the ecclesiarchy will deny it entirely, but the wolves will remember. They'll remember the night the world spoke its name aloud. They'll remember the silence afterward, heavy and waiting. And they'll remember the lesson their father taught them before he vanished into myth. Loyalty is not obedience. It is knowing who you serve when orders end. That line is carved above the Fang's inner gate now, where every initiate can see it before stepping into the storm. Not as scripture, as a dare, because the wolves know their saga isn't finished. The galaxy will burn again. Magnus will rise again. Empires will fall and rebuild and fall once more. And when the last light dies and the last world howls, that's when Russ will return. Not to lead, to hunt. So, if you ever find yourself on a dead world, under a broken sky, and you hear something howling in the dark, don't run, listen, because it might not be coming for you, it might be calling you home. The hunt never ends. If you're still watching, I can't thank you enough for staying with me. I know that there's still loads of room for improvement with the camera angles. The painting videos I see from the pros make it look so easy. It's not. I apologise if my hand tremors frustrated anybody. I have a bit of a neurological condition. One of the reasons I've been nervous to record myself painting. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed. Tell me what I got wrong. Tell me what you liked and want to see more of. Any like, subscribe or comment will signal the algorithm that I'm endeavouring towards authentic content rather than AI trash, as so many like to call it. I appreciate you all, and we'll see you next time.